The rain hammered down like God's own fury as Eleanor Hayes stumbled through the mud of Redemption Creek, her worn boots barely holding together. 3 days without food had left her hollow, desperate enough to approach the saloon despite knowing what men assumed about a woman alone. Her fingers trembled as she touched the thin gold band on her finger, her mother's wedding ring, the last piece of her old life before the fever took both parents and left her with nothing but debts and her stepfather's wandering hands. She'd run 2 weeks ago, stealing away in the night with only the clothes on her back. Now, staring at the general store's window display of bread and preserved goods, Eleanor made her decision. She pushed open the door, rain streaming from her ragged dress, and approached the counter where a thick-set man eyed her with barely concealed contempt. "I need food," she said, her voice stronger than she felt. "I can pay." She slid the ring across the counter, the gold catching the lamplight. Before you continue with Eleanor's journey, I'd love to ask you to take a moment to subscribe to our channel and leave a like on this video. Your support truly matters and motivates us to bring you more quality stories like this one. I'm curious, where are you listening to this tale right now? Let me know in the comments. The shopkeeper picked up the ring, squinted at it, then tossed it back. "That's worth maybe 2 loaves. You look like you need a whole lot more than that, girl." Eleanor's chest tightened. 2 loaves wouldn't get her through the week, wouldn't get her anywhere near the next town where she might find work. The shop door opened behind her, bringing with it a gust of wind and the presence of someone large enough to change the very air in the room. "I'll take whatever she needs," a deep voice said. "Put it on my account, Harris." Eleanor turned to see a man who looked carved from the very mountains surrounding the town. Tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair plastered to his forehead from the rain, and eyes the color of stormy seas. A jagged scar ran from his left eyebrow to his cheekbone, and his hands, rough, calloused, strong, rested easily at his sides. He wore a rancher's clothes, well-made but worn from honest work. "Mr. Thornton," the shopkeeper said, suddenly respectful. "Of course, sir." Eleanor snatched her ring from the counter, pride burning through her exhaustion. "I don't need charity." Those storm-gray eyes fixed on her, and something in them made her breath catch. Not pity, something harder, more honest. "Not offering charity," he said quietly. "Offering work. My ranch needs a cook and housekeeper, room, board, and wages. You look capable enough. I don't know you. Name's James Thornton. I run the Double T Ranch, 5 miles north. Ask anyone in town. I'm a hard man but a fair one." He paused, then added words that would echo in her memory for years to come. "I won't lie to you, miss. The work's demanding, and the winters are brutal. But I see a woman worth saving, and I could use someone who knows how to survive." The shopkeeper was already packing supplies: flour, salt pork, coffee, dried beans. Eleanor's stomach cramped at the sight of so much food. She should refuse. She should walk away. But the rain was getting worse, night was falling, and she had nowhere else to go. 1 month, she heard herself say. Trial basis. If it doesn't work, I leave with wages earned. Fair enough. James extended his hand. When she took it, his grip was warm and steady, and for the first time in weeks, Eleanor didn't feel like she was drowning. The ride to the Double T took 2 hours through worsening weather. James had given her his oilskin coat without a word, and she huddled in it atop the supply wagon, stealing glances at the man beside her. He didn't press her with questions, didn't demand her story, just drove with quiet competence through the storm, occasionally pointing out landmarks in case she ever needed to find her way back to town alone. That consideration unsettled her more than any amount of prying would have. The ranch house appeared through the rain like a promise. Solid timber construction, smoke rising from the chimney, lamplight glowing in the windows. James helped her down from the wagon, with hands that lingered a moment longer than necessary before he seemed to catch himself and step back. Bunkhouse is empty, except for my foreman, Cole. He's respectful, but I'll make sure he knows you're off limits for anything but polite conversation. You'll have the room off the kitchen. It's small, but it's private and has a good lock. He met her eyes directly. You're safe here, miss. Hayes. Eleanor Hayes. The name felt strange on her tongue, like claiming an identity she'd almost lost. Miss Hayes, then. He nodded toward the house. Get warm and dry. We'll talk terms in the morning. The room was indeed small, barely large enough for the narrow bed, washstand, and small dresser, but it was clean and blessedly private. Eleanor stood alone for the first time in days and allowed herself to tremble, to feel the full weight of how close she'd come to something far worse than hunger. A soft knock at the door made her jump. "It's James," came the voice. "Brought hot water for washing and some stew. I'll leave it outside the door." She waited until his footsteps retreated before opening the door to find a pitcher of steaming water, a bowl of thick beef stew with actual vegetables, and a plate of fresh bread. Tears blurred her vision as she carried them inside. When had anyone last shown her such simple, uncomplicated kindness? That night, lying in a real bed for the first time in weeks, Eleanor allowed herself to hope. Just a little. Morning came cold and clear. Eleanor woke before dawn, her body conditioned to early rising from years of caring for her ailing parents. She dressed in her only other outfit, a patched calico dress that had seen better years, and made her way to the kitchen. James was already there, feeding logs into the stove. He looked up as she entered, and something flickered across his face. Surprise, perhaps, or approval. "Didn't expect you up this early," he said. "I'm a hard worker, Mr. Thornton. You'll get your money's worth." She moved to the sink, taking stock of the kitchen. Clean, organized, but clearly the domain of a man living alone. "What time do your men eat?" 6. "There's just Cole right now. I had to let the other hands go after my wife." He stopped, jaw tightening. "After I lost my wife 2 years back. Been managing with minimal crew." Eleanor heard the weight of grief in those words, the kind that never quite healed. She recognized it because she carried the same burden. "I'll have breakfast ready. How many eggs does Cole eat?" The corner of James's mouth twitched. "All of them, if you let him." Their first week fell into a rhythm. Eleanor rose before dawn, prepared meals, cleaned, and began tackling the accumulated neglect of a house without a woman's touch. James worked the ranch, from sunrise to sunset, coming in only for meals and then retreating to his study with paperwork and whiskey. But she felt his eyes on her sometimes, not in the way her stepfather had looked at her, not with that sick hunger. James looked at her like he was trying to solve a puzzle, figure out what storm had washed her onto his doorstep. She didn't ask about his dead wife, though evidence of her lingered everywhere. A woman's shawl hanging forgotten on a peg, delicate china that never got used, a portrait over the mantel showing James younger and smiling beside a petite blonde woman with kind eyes. Cole, the foreman, was a weathered man in his 50s with laugh lines around his eyes. He treated Eleanor with courteous respect and never asked questions, though she sometimes caught him and James talking in low voices that stopped when she approached. On her 8th day, Eleanor was hanging laundry when she heard hoofbeats approaching fast. James and Cole were out checking fence lines in the north pasture, leaving her alone at the house. Her heart began to pound as 3 riders appeared over the rise. She recognized the lead rider immediately. Silas Burke, her stepfather's business partner, a man with dead eyes and a reputation for violence. He'd been one of the reasons she'd fled. "Well, well," Silas drawled as he reined in his horse. "Little Eleanor Hayes, your stepfather's been mighty worried about you." Eleanor's hand moved slowly toward the laundry basket where she'd hidden the kitchen knife. "My stepfather has no claim on me. I'm of age and owe him nothing." "See, that's where you're wrong. He paid good money for your upbringing after your parents died. Figures you owe him some compensation." Silas's smile made her skin crawl. "I offered to collect. Leave, now." Her voice didn't shake, though her hands did. Silas dismounted, his men following suit. "Or what? You'll scream? Ain't nobody around to hear you, girl." A rifle cocked behind her, the distinctive sound cutting through the morning air like a blade. "I'm around," James said, his voice cold as winter iron. "And my hearing's just fine." Eleanor turned to see James standing at the corner of the house, rifle aimed steady at Silas's chest. Cole was visible beyond him, shotgun in hand. Silas's expression shifted from predatory to calculating. "This ain't your concern, Thornton. The girl belongs to her family. The lady is my employee, under my protection on my land." James stepped forward, and Eleanor saw something dangerous in his eyes. "You're trespassing. In Texas, that's something a man can get shot for. Her stepfather will pay good money for her return. I'm not property." Eleanor's voice rang out clear and strong. "I'm a person, and I choose to stay here." James never took his eyes off Silas. "You heard her. Ride out. If I see you on my land again, I won't ask questions before I shoot." The 3 men remounted, Silas's face twisted with fury. "This ain't over, Thornton." "Yes," James said quietly. "It is." They rode away, but Eleanor knew they'd be back. Men like Silas didn't give up when money was involved. She stood frozen, still gripping the knife, as James lowered his rifle and turned to her. "Are you hurt?" She shook her head, not trusting her voice. "Good." He looked toward where the riders had disappeared. "How many more will come?" "I don't know. My stepfather is a cruel man who sees me as property he can sell. Silas was his first choice, but there'll be others." James's jaw tightened. "Then we'd better prepare. Come inside. We need to talk." In the kitchen, Eleanor finally allowed herself to shake. James poured her coffee, added whiskey without asking, and sat across from her at the table. "Tell me everything," he said. So she did. About her parents' deaths, the debts her stepfather claimed she owed, his attempts to sell her to various suitors, the night she'd overheard him and Silas planning to force her into marriage, about running with nothing but her mother's ring and the clothes on her back. James listened without interrupting, his expression growing darker with each revelation. "You're safe here," he said when she finished. "I give you my word. No one will touch you while I draw breath. You don't owe me this. I'm just your cook. You're a woman who deserves better than what life's handed her." He reached across the table, stopping just short of touching her hand. "And maybe you being here is helping me as much as I'm helping you." Eleanor looked at him, really looked, saw the loneliness carved into the lines around his eyes, the grief he carried like a yoke. Your wife? Sarah. She died giving birth to our son. He lived 3 days. His voice was steady, but his knuckles were white around his coffee cup. I failed them both. Couldn't get the doctor here fast enough through the snow. Couldn't save either of them. That wasn't your fault. Knowing that and feeling it are different things. He finally met her eyes. I made a promise after I buried them. Said I'd never let anyone get that close again. Never risk that kind of loss. Been keeping that promise for 2 years. Until now, Eleanor whispered. Until now, he acknowledged. You've been here barely a week, and already I'm breaking every vow I made. I find myself listening for your footsteps in the morning, watching for your smile at supper. You make this house feel less like a tomb. Eleanor's heart hammered against her ribs. James? I'm not asking for anything, he said quickly. Just wanted you to know that you staying here, it's not charity, it's selfish. You're saving me from drowning in the past. She reached across the table and took his hand. His palm was warm, calloused, strong. Then maybe we can save each other. The weeks that followed were both the hardest and the sweetest of Eleanor's life. James began teaching her to ride, his patient instruction and steadying hands building her confidence. They'd ride out to check the herd together, and he'd point out landmarks, teach her to read weather patterns, show her how to spot danger. In this country, he told her one afternoon, as they sat their horses on a ridge overlooking the ranch, survival means paying attention. See how those clouds are building? Storm coming. See how the cattle are clustered? They know it too. You make it sound simple. It is, once you learn to listen. The land talks if you're quiet enough to hear. He looked at her, sunlight catching in his gray eyes. You're a quick study, Eleanor. Quicker than I was. She felt herself blushing under his regard. I had a good teacher. They'd grown comfortable with each other. Not quite friends, not yet lovers, but something deeper than either. They talked during long evenings on the porch, sharing stories of their pasts. James spoke of his childhood in Missouri, his dreams of building something lasting. Eleanor told him about her mother's gentleness, her father's love of books, the life she'd lost. And slowly, achingly, they began to heal. But the specter of Silas Burke hung over them. James posted coal as a watch during the day and insisted Eleanor carry a pistol, teaching her to shoot with the same patience he'd shown her with riding. Keep your breath steady, he instructed, standing behind her as she aimed at tin cans lined up on the fence. His hands rested lightly on her shoulders, adjusting her stance. Don't jerk the trigger. Squeeze gentle, like you're asking, not demanding. Eleanor felt the heat of his body behind her, close enough that she could feel his breath on her neck. She fired, and the can flew backward. Perfect, James murmured, and she wasn't sure if he meant the shot or the moment. The almost kiss came a week later. Eleanor was baking bread when James came in from the fields, favoring his right side. She noticed immediately. What happened? Nothing. Horse got spooked. I took a tumble checking fence lines. Let me see. She moved toward him, but he stepped back. It's fine, Eleanor. It's not fine if you're hurt. Sit down. She used her best no-nonsense voice, the one that had gotten her parents to take their medicine. Reluctantly, James lowered himself into a chair. Eleanor moved behind him and carefully lifted his shirt, revealing a massive bruise blooming across his ribs and back. She sucked in a breath. You might have cracked a rib. This needs cleaning and wrapping. She fetched clean cloths and the medicine kit, her hands surprisingly steady as she began to tend him. Tell me if I hurt you. You could never hurt me, James said quietly. Eleanor's hands stilled. She moved around to face him and found him looking at her with an intensity that stole her breath. His hand came up slowly, giving her time to move away, and cupped her cheek. "Eleanor," he breathed, "I know I shouldn't." "Then don't talk." She leaned forward, closing the distance between them. Their lips met softly, tentatively, like two people afraid of breaking something precious. James's hand threaded through her hair, gentle despite the calluses, and Eleanor felt something in her chest crack open, not breaking, but blooming. When they parted, both were breathing hard. "I promised myself I wouldn't do this," James said against her forehead. "Promised I'd keep my distance." "Some promises are meant to be broken." Eleanor looked up at him. "I'm not afraid, James." "I am," he admitted. "Terrified. Because if I lose you too, you won't." She pressed her palm over his heart, feeling it thunder beneath her touch. "We're stronger together. You told me that yourself." He kissed her again, deeper this time, and Eleanor felt the last walls around her heart begin to crumble. The attack came 3 nights later. Eleanor woke to the smell of smoke and James's voice shouting her name. She bolted upright to find flames licking at the kitchen, spreading fast. James burst through her door, his face streaked with soot. "Fire!" he barked. "Deliberate! Men outside! Get to the root cellar! There's a tunnel that leads to the barn. Go! Not without you. I'll hold them off. Cole's coming from the bunkhouse. Go, Eleanor, now!" He thrust his pistol into her hands. "If anyone follows you who isn't me or Cole, shoot first." Eleanor wanted to argue, but the flames were spreading. She nodded and ran for the root cellar as James disappeared back into the main house. The tunnel was cramped and dark, but she crawled through on hands and knees, emerging in the barn. Gunshots cracked through the night. Eleanor's heart seized. James. She checked the pistol, loaded, 6 shots, and moved toward the barn door. Through the gap, she could see the house fully engulfed now, flames reaching for the sky. 4 men stood in the yard, silhouetted against the fire. Silas was one of them, shouting orders. "Thornton," he called, "send out the girl, and we'll let you live." A shot from the well house answered him. James's position. Relief flooded through Eleanor. He was alive. "Your choice," Silas called. "She ain't worth dying for." "Every woman's worth dying for." James' voice rang clear. "Especially her." Eleanor's breath caught. She watched as Silas gestured to his men, who began to spread out, trying to flank James' position. They'd kill him. She knew it with cold certainty. They'd kill him and take her and burn everything he'd built. Unless she acted first. Eleanor stepped out of the barn, pistol raised. "Silas." 4 heads whipped toward her. James's voice roared. "Eleanor, no." "I'm here," she said, walking forward with her gun trained on Silas. "Let him go. This is between us." Silas smiled, that dead-eyed expression that had haunted her nightmares. "Smart girl. Drop the gun and come here." "No." Eleanor's voice was steady. "You leave now, all of you, or I start shooting, and I won't miss." "You don't have the stones, little Eleanor." She aimed at the dirt near his feet and fired. The bullet kicked up dust inches from his boots. "Try me again." James used the distraction to move, repositioning with his rifle. Cole appeared from the darkness, his shotgun covering 2 of Silas's men. Silas's expression turned ugly. "You're making a mistake." "No," Eleanor said. "I made a mistake, thinking I had to run and hide. This is my home. This is my family. And you're not welcome here." "You heard her," James said, stepping into the firelight beside Eleanor. His presence was solid, unshakable. "Ride out. Don't come back, because next time, We won't warn you first." For a long moment, the knight balanced on a knife's edge. Then, Silas spat in the dirt and turned to his men. "Mount up. This ain't worth getting killed over." They rode away, but James didn't lower his rifle until they disappeared into the darkness. Then he turned to Eleanor, and she saw in his face something between fury and admiration. "That was the most foolish, brave, incredible thing I've ever seen," he said hoarsely. "I couldn't let them kill you. I couldn't let them take you." He pulled her against him, and Eleanor felt his heart hammering. "When I saw you walk out into the open, I had to save you." "Why?" he asked against her hair. The question she'd been waiting for, the one that had been building between them for weeks. Eleanor pulled back to look at him, his face illuminated by the dying fire. "Why did you save me?" she asked. "That first day in town, you could have walked away." James's hands came up to frame her face, so gentle despite their strength. His eyes held hers, storm gray and fierce with emotion. "Because saving you saved me too," he said simply. "You walked into that store looking like you'd taken on the whole world alone and refused to quit. You reminded me there were things worth fighting for, worth living for." Eleanor felt tears slide down her cheeks. "I love you, James Thornton. I love you, Eleanor Hayes." He kissed her then, tender and fierce and full of promise. "Marry me. Not because it's convenient or safe, but because I can't imagine breathing without you anymore." "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, 1,000 times yes." Cole cleared his throat behind them. "Not to interrupt, but the house is still on fire, and we should probably do something about that." They spent the rest of the night fighting the blaze, managing to save the structure, though the kitchen was gutted. As dawn broke over the charred remains, Eleanor stood beside James, both of them covered in soot and exhaustion, and felt something like joy. "We'll rebuild," James said, his arm around her shoulders. "Make it better than before." "Together," Eleanor said. "Together." The wedding was small. Just Cole, the town preacher, and a handful of neighboring ranchers who'd come to respect the couple's resilience. Eleanor wore a simple blue dress that James had bought her, and in her hair she tucked the wildflowers he'd picked that morning. When the preacher asked if she took this man, Eleanor's voice rang clear. "I do." When James slipped a ring on her finger, gold, simple, perfect, he leaned close and whispered, "You saved me in that store when you refused to give up. Every day since, you've saved me a little more." "You saved me too," she whispered back, "in all the ways that matter." They rebuilt the kitchen together, Eleanor working beside James and Cole with hammer and nails. The ranch began to prosper as word spread of their quality stock and fair dealing. Eleanor started a garden, brought chickens and a milk cow, transformed the house into a true home. 6 months after the wedding, Eleanor stood on the porch, watching the sunset paint the sky gold and crimson. James came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist and resting his chin on her shoulder. "Happy?" he asked. Eleanor leaned back against his solid warmth, feeling safe and loved and home. "More than I ever dreamed possible." "Me too." He turned her in his arms, and she saw in his eyes the man who'd first offered her, not charity, but dignity, who'd seen her worth when she'd almost forgotten it herself. "You know what the best part is?" "What's that?" "Every morning, I get to wake up and save you all over again. From loneliness, from forgetting how strong you are, from anything that threatens what we've built." Eleanor smiled and pulled him down for a kiss. "And I get to save you right back." The stars came out over the Double T Ranch, silver and bright, witness to two people who'd found in each other exactly what they needed. Not rescue, but partnership. Not shelter from the storm, but someone to stand with them in it. They'd both been broken when they met. Together, they'd become whole. And in the vast, beautiful, unforgiving landscape of the West, they'd carved out something neither had thought possible again. A chance at happiness, fought for and won and cherished. Together. The first winter on the Double T, as James's wife, tested Eleanor in ways she hadn't anticipated. The November snows came early, burying the ranch under 3 feet of white silence. The isolation should have frightened her. This woman who'd grown up in town with neighbors close enough to hear. But instead, she found peace in the quiet intimacy of long evenings by the fire with James. They'd fallen into rhythms that felt both new and ancient. James would come in from feeding the stock, stamping snow from his boots, and find Eleanor at the stove with hot coffee waiting. She'd help him out of his heavy coat, her fingers lingering on his shoulders. And he'd pull her close for a kiss that tasted of winter air and promise. "You're freezing," she'd say, even as she pressed closer. "You're warm enough for both of us," he'd reply, his voice rough with cold and affection. But the isolation brought challenges too. Eleanor woke one January morning to find James already dressed, his expression grave as he stared out the window at the pre-dawn darkness. "What's wrong?" she asked, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders. "Storm coming. Bad one by the feel of it." He turned to her, and she saw worry etched in the lines around his eyes. "We need to bring the herd closer to the ranch, get them in the shelter of the south pasture. If they get scattered in a blizzard, we'll lose them." "I'll help." Eleanor was already moving toward her clothes. "Eleanor, it's dangerous. The temperature's dropping fast, and visibility will be near zero once the snow starts. Which is why you need every hand available." She met his eyes steadily. "I'm not the helpless woman you found in town anymore, James. You taught me to ride, to track, to survive. Let me prove it." He studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Stay close to me. If I tell you to do something, you do it immediately. No questions." "No questions," she agreed. They rode out with Cole an hour before the storm hit, pushing the cattle toward the protected valley. The wind had already begun to howl, carrying ice crystals that stung exposed skin like tiny knives. Eleanor kept her horse close to James's big roan, following his lead as they worked to turn the herd. The cattle were restless, sensing the coming storm, and a few kept trying to break away. Eleanor found herself riding hard to turn back strays, her heart pounding with exhilaration and fear. This was real work, the kind that mattered, and she was doing it. Then the blizzard hit. One moment, Eleanor could see James and Cole clearly. The next, the world disappeared into a wall of white. The wind screamed, and snow fell so thick she could barely see her horse's ears. "James!" she shouted, but the wind tore her voice away. Panic clawed at her throat. She'd lost sight of him, of Cole, of everything. The cattle were invisible shapes moving in the whiteness. Her horse danced nervously, picking up her fear. "Easy," she told him, forcing her voice to steady. "Easy, boy." James had taught her what to do if she got separated in bad weather. Stay calm. Let the horse find its way. Trust its instincts. Horses could sense direction better than humans in whiteout conditions. Eleanor loosened her reins slightly, giving her mount his head. The horse turned and began walking with purpose. And she trusted him, even though every instinct screamed to take control, to do something. After what felt like hours, but was probably only 20 minutes, shapes emerged from the snow. The barn, the house. Her horse had brought her home. But where was James? She wanted to unsaddle and go inside to warmth, but she couldn't, not while James was out there. Eleanor led her horse into the barn, rubbed him down quickly, and then stood at the barn door, straining to see through the blowing snow. "Please," she whispered to the howling wind, "please, bring him home." Minutes stretched into an hour. Eleanor's fingers and toes went numb despite her layers. She was about to saddle a fresh horse and go looking when two shapes materialized from the storm. James and Cole, riding double on James's roan, leading Cole's horse behind them. Relief hit Eleanor so hard her knees nearly buckled. She ran to them as James dismounted, and he caught her against him with one arm, his face red with cold, but his eyes warm with relief. "You made it back," he said hoarsely. "God, Eleanor, when I couldn't find you. The horse knew the way. You taught me that." She pulled back to look at Cole, who was favoring his left leg. "What happened?" "Horse stepped in a hole, went down hard," Cole said through gritted teeth. "Threw me clear, but I think I broke my leg." Between them, Eleanor and James got Cole into the house and onto the kitchen table. Eleanor had watched her mother set her father's broken arm once, and she called on that memory now as she examined Cole's leg. "Definite break," she said, meeting James's eyes. "We need to set it and splint it. Town doctor's too far in this storm." "You've done this before?" Cole asked, his face pale with pain. "Once, on a man much more stubborn than you." Eleanor squeezed his hand. "It's going to hurt." "James, I need whiskey and something for him to bite down on." What followed was one of the longest hours of Eleanor's life. She set Cole's leg with James holding him steady, the foreman's muffled screams cutting through her heart. But when it was done, the leg was straight, splinted, and elevated. "You've got a good hand, Mrs. Thornton," Cole said weakly, the whiskey and exhaustion pulling him toward sleep. James married himself a hell of a woman. After Cole drifted off in the spare room, Eleanor and James stood alone in the kitchen. She was trembling, the adrenaline finally draining away, and James pulled her close. "When I couldn't find you in that storm," he said into her hair, "I thought I'd die. Thought I'd broken my promise to keep you safe. I kept myself safe. You taught me how." Eleanor looked up at him. "We're partners, James. Equals. You don't have to carry everything alone anymore." He kissed her forehead, her cheeks, her lips. "I don't deserve you. Good thing I decided you get me anyway." The storm raged for 3 days. They were snowbound, cut off from town and neighbors, but Eleanor found she didn't mind. They had supplies, the animals were sheltered, and Cole was healing. She and James spent long evenings playing cards, reading aloud from the few books they owned, and talking about dreams for the future. "I want to expand the herd come spring," James said one night as they lay in bed, Eleanor tucked against his side. "Maybe hire another hand or two, now that we can afford it." "And I want to start a proper garden," Eleanor said. "Vegetables we can sell in town, maybe. And I've been thinking about the children." She felt James go still beneath her. "Children?" Eleanor lifted her head to look at him, seeing the flash of old grief in his eyes. "I know you're afraid, after losing Sarah and your son." "I'm terrified," he admitted. "The thought of putting you through that, of losing you. Life doesn't come with guarantees, James. We could have another blizzard, another fire, a dozen other disasters. But we face them together." She placed her palm over his heart. "I want children with you, your children, but only when you're ready." He covered her hand with his calloused fingers warm and strong. What if I'm never ready? Then we build a beautiful life with just the two of us. Eleanor meant it absolutely. I chose you, James Thornton. The rest is just details. He pulled her up for a kiss that started gentle and grew fierce, his hands tangling in her hair. I love you, he said against her lips. God help me. I love you so much it scares me. Then be scared with me, Eleanor whispered back. We'll be brave together. Spring came late that year, but when it arrived, it transformed the ranch into something magical. Wildflowers carpeted the meadows, the creek ran full and clear, and the herd thrived on fresh grass. Eleanor planted her garden with seeds she'd ordered from a catalog, her hands in the dirt, sun on her face, entirely happy. James worked from dawn to dusk, but she could see the weight lifting from his shoulders. He smiled more, laughed with Cole over breakfast, and sometimes caught Eleanor around the waist as she worked and spun her into an impromptu dance with no music but the wind. "What's gotten into you?" she asked, laughing as he dipped her dramatically. "I'm happy," he said, like the revelation surprised him. "I didn't think I'd ever feel this again, but here it is. Because of you." They hired 2 new hands, young men from town looking for honest work. Eleanor found herself running a household of 5, cooking large meals and managing supplies like she'd been born to it. The work was hard, but it was satisfying in a way her old life had never been. One evening in late April, Eleanor was washing dishes when James came up behind her, his arms encircling her waist. She leaned back against him, content and tired in the best way. "Eleanor," he said quietly, "I've been thinking about what you said, about children." Her hands stilled in the dishwater. "Yes? I'm still afraid," he admitted. "Don't know if I'll ever not be afraid, but I realize something. I'm more afraid of growing old without a piece of you and me walking around in the world. More afraid of letting fear win." Eleanor turned in his arms, hardly daring to breathe. "James, I want children with you," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Want to see your eyes in a daughter's face, your stubbornness in a son. Want to build something that lasts beyond just us." He cupped her face gently. "If you're willing to risk it with me." "I'm willing to risk anything with you," Eleanor said, tears blurring her vision. "Everything with you." They made love that night with new tenderness, new hope, planting seeds of a different kind. Summer brought prosperity. The cattle brought good prices at market, and James was able to make improvements to the ranch. New fencing, repairs to the bunkhouse, even a small addition to the main house. Eleanor's garden flourished, and she began selling vegetables to the general store in town, earning her own money for the first time in her life. She loved the independence of it, the pride of contributing tangibly to their success. James encouraged her, helped her load the wagon for town trips, never once suggested her earnings were anything but her own. "You're making more than the garden's worth," he teased one evening, counting the coins she'd brought home. "Maybe I should quit ranching and just sell your tomatoes." "You'd be bored within a week," Eleanor laughed. "Besides, someone has to do the hard work while I play in the dirt." He caught her around the waist, pulling her onto his lap. "Is that what you call it? Playing?" "Productive playing," she amended, kissing his nose. "The best kind." But their peace was shattered on a hot August afternoon when a stranger rode up to the house. Eleanor was alone, James and the hands were at the north pasture, and Cole had gone to town for supplies. She watched the rider approach with growing unease, her hand moving instinctively to the rifle by the door. The man who dismounted was thin and sharp-featured, wearing a suit despite the heat. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Mrs. Thornton?" he said, removing his hat. "Name's Jeremiah Watts. I'm an attorney from Austin." Eleanor didn't lower the rifle. "What do you want?" "Just to talk, ma'am. It's about your stepfather, Cecil Hayes." Her blood went cold. "I have nothing to say about that man." "He's dead, ma'am." Watts said it flatly, watching her reaction. "Died 6 weeks ago of apoplexy. But before he passed, he made certain claims about you, claims that have legal implications." "What kind of claims?" Eleanor's fingers stayed near the trigger. "He alleged you stole from him before you fled, specifically a considerable sum of money and jewelry. His business partners are demanding restitution from his estate, which means from you, as his only living relation." "That's a lie." Eleanor's voice shook with fury. "I never stole anything. I left with nothing but my mother's ring, her property, not his." Watts shrugged. "Nevertheless, there's a claim outstanding. If you don't return to Austin to contest it formally, a judgment will be entered against you. Your property, including this ranch, as you're married, could be seized to satisfy the debt." "Get off my land." Eleanor raised the rifle. "Now." "I'm just the messenger, ma'am. And I'm the woman with the gun. Ride out before my husband gets back, or you'll regret it." Watts remounted, his expression sour. "You have 3 months to respond to the claim, Mrs. Thornton. After that, the law takes its course." He rode away, leaving Eleanor trembling with rage and fear. When James returned at sunset, he found her on the porch, rifle across her lap, staring at nothing. "Eleanor?" He was off his horse in an instant, kneeling beside her. "What happened?" She told him everything, watching his expression darken with each word. When she finished, he was silent for a long moment. "We'll fight it," he said finally. "We'll go to Austin, face this head-on. I won't let them take what we've built. James, the cost, lawyers, travel, time away from the ranch, is worth it." He took the rifle from her hands and pulled her to her feet, holding her close. "You're worth it. This life we're building is worth it. We don't run, Eleanor. We stand and fight." She buried her face against his chest. "I thought I was finally free of him. Even dead, he's trying to destroy me. He won't succeed." James's voice was iron hard. "I promise you that." The trip to Austin was long and exhausting. They left Cole in charge of the ranch and made the 4-day journey by stage, Eleanor watching the landscape change, from the familiar hills of home to the flatter, more urban sprawl of the state capital. Austin was bigger than any city Eleanor had ever seen, full of noise and crowds and buildings that seemed to scrape the sky. She clung to James's arm as they navigated the streets to the attorney's office. James had wired ahead to hire. Marcus Reed was a man in his 60s, with sharp eyes and a reputation for honesty. He listened to Eleanor's story without interruption, occasionally making notes. "These claims are spurious at best," he said when she finished. "But that doesn't mean they're not dangerous. Your stepfather's associates are trying to squeeze money from his estate by any means necessary. The burden of proof is on them, but proving a negative that you didn't steal can be challenging." "What do we do?" James asked, his hand tight around Eleanor's. "We gather evidence, character witnesses, documentation of your departure, anything that shows the timeline and your circumstances. and we expose your stepfather's true character, his attempts to force you into marriage, his treatment of you, make you sympathetic to a judge and jury. The next weeks were a blur of meetings, depositions, and preparations. Eleanor had to relive the worst period of her life in excruciating detail for strangers. She had to face men who looked at her with suspicion or pity, who questioned her virtue and her honesty. Through it all, James was her rock. He never left her side, never doubted her, never wavered. When she broke down crying after a particularly brutal deposition, he held her and promised that no matter what happened, they'd face it together. The trial came in late September. Eleanor sat beside James in the courthouse, her hands clenched in her lap as the prosecution laid out their case. They painted her as a scheming girl who'd stolen from her benefactor and run away to avoid consequences. Then it was their turn. Marcus Reed was methodical and devastating. He called witnesses who testified to Cecil Hayes's violent temper and his attempts to sell Eleanor to the highest bidder. He produced the proprietor from the general store in Redemption Creek, who testified to Eleanor's desperate state when she'd arrived. He told James, whose quiet testimony about finding a woman trying to trade her last possession for food moved several jury members to tears. Finally, he called Eleanor. She sat in the witness box, feeling the weight of dozens of eyes on her, and told her truth. About her parents' deaths, about Cecil's cruelty, about the night she'd overheard him planning to force her into marriage with Silas Burke, about running with nothing but her mother's ring. "Did you steal anything from Cecil Hayes?" Marcus asked. "No, sir. I took only what was mine by right, my mother's wedding ring and the clothes on my back. Everything else I left behind." And these claims of missing money and jewelry? Lies. Eleanor looked directly at the jury. "Mr. Hayes gambled and drank heavily. If money went missing, it was by his own hand, not mine. I wanted only my freedom." The prosecution tried to shake her story, but Eleanor held firm. She'd lived it. She knew the truth. And when she stepped down, she saw belief in the jury's eyes. The verdict came 2 days later. Not guilty. The claims were dismissed with prejudice, and the judge issued a scathing rebuke to Cecil Hayes's associates for bringing such a frivolous case. Eleanor walked out of that courthouse a free woman, truly free for the first time in years. James lifted her off her feet and spun her around right there on the courthouse steps, laughing with relief and joy. "It's over," he said. "Finally over." "No," Eleanor corrected, kissing him soundly. "It's just beginning." They returned to the Double T in mid-October, the landscape painted in autumn colors. Cole met them at the house with a grin and a report that everything had run smoothly in their absence. "Good to have you back, Mrs. Thornton," he said. "Ranch isn't the same without you." That night, Eleanor and James stood on their porch watching the stars emerge, arms wrapped around each other against the chill. "I've been thinking," James said quietly, "about legacy, about what we leave behind." Eleanor looked up at him, seeing the hope and fear warring in his expression. "James, I want this," he said, gesturing to the ranch, to the life they'd built. "Want it to matter, want it to continue." He placed his hand gently on her stomach. "Is there any chance?" Eleanor covered his hand with hers, tears springing to her eyes. "I think so. I wasn't sure. Didn't want to say anything until after the trial. But yes, I think there might be." James's face transformed, joy and terror chasing across it in equal measure. "You're sure?" "As sure as I can be. Another month and I'll know for certain." She watched him carefully. "Are you all right?" I'm terrified, he admitted. But I'm also happier than I've ever been. How is that possible? Because joy and fear can exist together, Eleanor said softly. Because you can be scared and still choose hope. You taught me that. He pulled her close, his face buried in her hair. I love you. God, Eleanor, I love you so much. I love you too, and whatever comes, we face it together. Winter arrived early that year, but the double T was ready. The herd was strong, the barns were full, and the house, their home, was warm and welcoming. Eleanor's suspicions were confirmed by the doctor in town in early November. She was carrying James Thornton's child, due in late spring. James was simultaneously elated and terrified. Eleanor would catch him watching her with an intensity that was almost painful, as if he were trying to memorize every moment. He became protective to the point of hovering, until Eleanor finally sat him down one evening and took his hands in hers. James, I need you to trust me, she said gently. Trust that I'm strong enough for this. Trust that I'll tell you if something's wrong. But you can't protect me from living. I can't lose you. His voice was raw. If something happens, then we'll face it when it comes. But you can't spend the next 6 months waiting for disaster. She squeezed his hands. I need you present, James. Here with me, not lost in what-ifs. He took a shaky breath and nodded. I'll try. That's all I can promise. That's all I need. True to his word, James made an effort to rein in his fear. He still worried. She could see it in the lines around his eyes. But he let her work in the garden, let her manage the household, let her live. And slowly, as the months passed and Eleanor remained healthy and strong, his terror began to ease into something more manageable. They spent long winter evenings planning for the baby, discussing names, building a cradle from oak wood, preparing the small room next to theirs. Cole taught Eleanor to knit, and she made tiny socks and blankets with clumsy but determined fingers. You're making a mess of that, Cole teased gently, as Eleanor dropped another stitch. I'm making it with love, she retorted. That's what counts. James would sit by the fire, watching her work, a soft expression on his face that made Eleanor's heart ache with happiness. This was what healing looked like, not the absence of fear, but the choice to live fully despite it. Spring arrived with a profusion of wildflowers and new calves. Eleanor's belly grew round and prominent, and she moved with the careful grace of late pregnancy. The doctor visited twice, pronouncing everything normal and healthy, which eased James's worry somewhat. Any day now, the doctor said, after his second visit in late April. You've got a strong woman there, Thornton. Should be a straightforward delivery. But when Eleanor's labor began on a warm May morning, James's carefully maintained calm shattered. She found him pacing the porch, looking like he was about to jump out of his skin. James, she called from the doorway, one hand on her back. It's time. His face went white. I'll get the doctor. Already sent Cole. Now come inside and help me. Eleanor, I can't. I don't know what to... She crossed to him and took his face in her hands. Go slow. It hurts, but I need you with me. Can you do that? He searched her face, saw her trust and her pain and her strength, and something in him steadied. I'll die before I hurt you, he said hoarsely. I know. Now come on. The labor was long, but not complicated. The doctor arrived by midday and confirmed that everything was progressing normally. James stayed by Eleanor's side, holding her hand, wiping her forehead, murmuring encouragement even as his own fear threatened to overwhelm him. You're doing so well. he told her during a contraction that left her breathless and shaking. "You're the strongest person I know. Tell me that after this is over," Eleanor gasped. As the afternoon lengthened toward evening, Eleanor felt the urgent, undeniable need to push. The doctor positioned himself, James supporting her from behind, and she bore down with every ounce of strength she possessed. "That's it," the doctor encouraged. "I can see the head. One more push like that." Eleanor pushed, crying out with the effort, and suddenly the pressure released. A moment of terrifying silence. Then the most beautiful sound she'd ever heard. Her baby crying. "It's a girl," the doctor announced, holding up a tiny, red-faced, perfect creature. A healthy baby girl. James made a sound like a sob, his arms tightening around Eleanor. She reached for her daughter, and the doctor placed the baby in her arms, still slippery and screaming and utterly magnificent. "Hello, little one," Eleanor whispered, tears streaming down her face. "Hello, beautiful girl." James leaned over her shoulder, one hand gently touching his daughter's impossibly small head. "She's perfect," he breathed. "Eleanor, she's perfect." "She is," Eleanor agreed, looking up at him to see tears tracking down his face. "What should we name her?" They'd discussed names for months, but never settled on one. Now, looking at his daughter's face, James said quietly, "Hope. Her name is Hope." Eleanor smiled through her tears. "Hope Fortin. It's perfect." The next weeks were a blur of sleepless nights and endless wonder. Hope was a good baby, healthy and strong-lunged, and Eleanor marveled at the miracle of her. James was equally besotted, spending hours just watching his daughter sleep, his expression full of awe and terror and love. "I never thought I'd have this again," he confessed one night as Eleanor nursed Hope by lamplight. "Never thought I'd risk it. But God, Eleanor, she's worth every moment of fear." "We're all worth it," Eleanor said softly. "This life we've built, it's worth fighting for." As summer settled over the Double T, Eleanor found a new rhythm. She worked with Hope, strapped to her back in a sling Cole had helped her fashion, the baby content to sleep or observe as her mother tended the garden and managed the household. James would come in from the fields and scoop his daughter into his arms, talking to her about the ranch, the cattle, the weather, as if she could understand every word. "You're gonna spoil her," Eleanor teased. "That's a father's job," James replied, utterly unrepentant. One evening in late July, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset with Hope drowsing in Eleanor's arms, James said quietly, "Thank you." "For what?" "For saving me. For giving me this." He gestured to encompass the ranch, their daughter, their life. "For refusing to give up that day in town when you had every reason to." Eleanor leaned against him, careful not to jostle Hope. "You saved me first, saw me when I felt invisible, gave me a reason to be brave." "We saved each other," James said, echoing the words that had bound them from the beginning. "We did," Eleanor agreed. "And we'll keep saving each other every day for the rest of our lives." As the stars emerged overhead and Hope slept peacefully between them, Eleanor thought about the journey that had brought her here. From desperate flight to hard-won freedom, from loneliness to love, from merely surviving to truly living. She'd walked into a general store, ready to trade her last possession for a chance at life, and instead had found a man who saw her worth. Together, they'd built something stronger than either could have managed alone. And now, looking at her daughter's perfect face and feeling James's solid warmth beside her, Eleanor knew with absolute certainty that this was only the beginning. There would be more challenges, more fears to face, more storms to weather. But they'd face them together, always together. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I'd love to know where you're enjoying this tale from. Are you listening at home, during your commute, or perhaps while working? Please subscribe to the From Wild West channel and share your thoughts in the comments below. What did you think of Eleanor and James's journey? Your feedback means the world to us.